A retired shelter dog locks eyes with the most hated, most dangerous puppy in the building and does something no one expected. He chooses him. The staff is stunned. This battered mutt was scheduled to be put down in days. He growls at everyone, bites without warning, and refuses to be touched. But now, he's cuddling next to the one dog nobody thought would care. What starts as a strange act of compassion turns into something way bigger, because this isn't just about dogs. It's about what they know. Buried inside this unlikely bond is a secret, one that ties back to a death no one could explain, and a crime that's still happening in the shadows. Why would a gentle old dog risk everything for the one animal everyone wanted to forget? And what happens when the past they buried finally bites back? Can one bond between two broken souls bring down something much bigger before it's too late? You being here is a reminder. The quiet acts of love and kindness still matter. If you hold space for compassion, you're already part of this community. The evening shadows crept across the concrete floors of the rural shelter as Brewster settled into his new kennel. The German Shepherd's graying muzzle and battle-worn coat told stories of years of dedicated service, but his eyes remained sharp and alert, taking in every detail of his surroundings. Through the chain-link fencing, he observed the other residents of the shelter. Most were typical strays, a mix of breeds huddled together for comfort, sharing warmth and companionship in their temporary home. But one dog stood apart from the rest, both literally and figuratively. At the far end of the row, a white mutt with notched ears and a scarred body stood alone, tethered by a heavy chain to prevent him from reaching the fence of his kennel. The dog's name, according to the worried whispers of the shelter staff, was Knox. His lips were permanently curled in a defensive snarl, and his eyes darted frantically from shadow to shadow, as if expecting an attack from any direction. Brewster watched as the shelter workers moved cautiously around Knox's kennel, their bodies tense with fear. They slid his food bowl under the gate with a long-handled tool, keeping as much distance as possible. Knox would wait until they were gone before approaching his meal, trust clearly foreign to his wounded spirit. "That one's beyond help," Brewster heard one worker mutter to another. "Too dangerous to adopt out. Been here 3 weeks, and he's only gotten worse." The retired K-9 officer recognized the signs of deep trauma in Knox's behavior. It was written in every rigid muscle, every defensive growl, every flinch at sudden movements. This wasn't simple aggression. This was the response of a dog who had known nothing but cruelty. As night fell and the shelter grew quiet, Brewster continued his vigilant observation. While other dogs drifted off to sleep, Knox remained alert, pacing his small space, the chain dragging heavily behind him. The white mutt's anxiety was palpable, filling the air with an electric tension that kept nearby dogs pressed against the far walls of their kennels. The next morning brought the usual bustle of feeding time. The shelter staff moved efficiently down the row, filling bowls and changing water. Everything proceeded normally until they reached the kennel next to Knox's. A large mixed-breed dog, new to the shelter, began barking aggressively at the sight of food. As the worker placed the bowl inside, the dog lunged forward unexpectedly, slamming against the shared fence with Knox's kennel. The impact sent Knox into a panic. He exploded into a frenzy of snarls and snapping teeth, throwing himself against his chain with such force that the metal links rattled violently. The other dog responded in kind, and suddenly the entire shelter erupted into a cacophony of barking and chaos. Without hesitation, Brewster rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate and calm as he positioned himself directly in front of his kennel gate, facing the source of the disturbance. He didn't bark or growl. He simply stood there, tall and dignified, his presence commanding attention. The shelter staff froze, watching in amazement as Brewster's quiet authority began to affect the other dogs. His calm energy spread through the shelter like a gentle wave, and gradually the barking subsided. The aggressive dog next to Knox backed away from the fence, subdued by the German Shepherd's unwavering stare. Knox, still trembling with fear and adrenaline, found his eyes drawn to Brewster. For the first time since arriving at the shelter, his snarl faltered. Something in the older dog's steady gaze seemed to reach past his defenses, speaking to a part of him that remembered what it was like to feel safe. The shelter workers exchanged shocked glances as they witnessed this silent interaction. Knox's breathing slowly steadied, and his posture, while still tense, lost some of its desperate edge. Brewster maintained his protective stance until he was certain the situation was fully diffused, then calmly lay down, keeping his body oriented toward Knox's kennel. "Would you look at that?" whispered one of the workers. "In all my years, I've never seen anything like it. That old K9 just handled that situation better than any of us could have." For the rest of the day, Brewster kept his quiet vigil. Each time Knox showed signs of distress, the German Shepherd would shift his position slightly, drawing the white mutt's attention and offering a silent reminder that he wasn't alone anymore. It was the beginning of an unexpected connection. Two abandoned dogs, one bearing the scars of service, the other the marks of abuse, finding common ground in their shared solitude. Luann Riggs stood at the shelter's front desk, her freckled face set with determination as she faced her supervisor. "You saw what happened yesterday with Brewster and Knox. There's something special there. I just know it." The senior staff member shook her head. "Knox is classified as dangerous, Luann. We can't risk putting another dog in with him, even a former police dog." "But that's exactly why it could work." Luann's auburn braid swung as she leaned forward earnestly. "Brewster has training, experience. He knew exactly how to handle that situation yesterday." And Knox responded to him. "You all saw it." After hours of debate and Luann's persistent advocacy, the shelter staff reluctantly agreed to a carefully supervised introduction. They chose a quiet afternoon when few visitors were expected. Brewster was brought out first, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension in the air. Knox was let out second, still secured on his heavy chain. The staff watched nervously as the two dogs were allowed to share space in the shelter's small exercise yard. Knox's initial reaction was predictably defensive, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his throat. But Brewster's response surprised everyone. The German Shepherd simply lay down, his body language relaxed and non-threatening, dark eyes fixed steadily on Knox. Minutes passed. Gradually, Knox's growl faded to silence. His rigid posture began to soften. With halting steps, he moved closer to Brewster, drawn by the older dog's unwavering serenity. When Knox finally settled nearby, not touching but close enough to share space, Luann had to blink back tears. "See?" she whispered to no one in particular. "He just needed someone to believe in him." Over the next few days, Luann watched the unlikely pair with growing hope. Knox's transformation was subtle but undeniable. The white mutt still startled at sudden movements and remained wary of humans, but his reactions were less extreme. With Brewster nearby, he could be approached for feeding without launching into a panic. During her shifts, Luann spent extra time at their kennel, talking softly to both dogs. While her colleagues hurried past Knox's space, she lingered, determined to show him that not all humans meant harm. Sometimes, when she spoke, Knox's eyes would meet hers briefly, not with their usual fear and aggression, but with a flicker of something that looked almost like interest. "You're wasting your time with that one," Mr. Callahan's stern voice interrupted one of these moments. The shelter director stood in the corridor, arms crossed, his name tag gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Knox has been here too long already. We're not a rehabilitation center, Ms. Riggs. We have limited resources and dozens of adoptable dogs." Luann straightened up, her hands trembling slightly as she faced her boss. "He's showing improvement, Mr. Callahan. Real improvement. If we just give him more time—" "Time isn't the issue," Callahan cut her off. "He's a liability. One incident, one bite, and this shelter could face serious consequences. The board has already made their decision." As Callahan walked away, Luann turned back to the kennel. Knox had pressed himself against Brewster's side, as if seeking reassurance. The German Shepherd remained steady, a silent guardian. Looking at them, Luann felt something shift inside her, a growing certainty that the shelter's rigid policies on aggressive breeds were fundamentally wrong. That evening, as she finished her rounds, Luann paused to study the paperwork on Knox Kennel. The stark labels jumped out at her. Dangerous. Do not handle. Failed temperament test. But when she looked through the chain-link fence, she saw something different. She saw a damaged soul learning to trust again, thanks to an old police dog who refused to give up on him. "They're wrong about you," she whispered, pressing her fingers against the fence. Knox lifted his head, meeting her gaze for a full second before looking away. It wasn't much, but to Luann, it felt like a promise. In that moment, she made a decision. She wouldn't let Knox become another casualty of a system that valued efficiency over compassion. Somehow, she would find a way to prove that every dog, even the ones society had given up on, deserved a chance at redemption. Brewster watched her from his place beside Knox, his wise eyes seeming to understand the weight of her silent pledge. As she turned to leave, Luann could have sworn she saw the old shepherd give her the slightest nod of approval. She had become more than just another shelter worker. She was now their ally in the fight for Knox's future. Late at night, after her regular shift ended, Luann sat hunched over her computer in the shelter's dimly lit office. The glow of the screen illuminated her tired face as she dug through old intake records searching for any clue about Knox's past. Something about his scars and behavior patterns nagged at her. They seemed too specific, too deliberate to be a random abuse. Her fingers froze over the keyboard when she found it. The initial police report from Knox's seizure included photos that made her stomach turn. The white mutt had been one of 15 dogs rescued from an abandoned property, but he was the only one who'd survived. The officer's notes described chains, fighting rings, and training equipment. Knox hadn't been a fighter. He'd been bait, used to train other dogs to kill. "Oh, Knox," Luann whispered, wiping tears from her eyes. She glanced through the office window toward his kennel, where he lay pressed against Brewster's solid form. The German shepherd's presence had become Knox's only source of security. The next morning, Mr. Callahan called an emergency staff meeting. Luann's heart sank as she listened to his clipped tones. "The board has reviewed our capacity issues," he announced, shuffling papers on his desk. "We're implementing immediate action on all high-risk cases. Knox euthanasia has been moved up to tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" Luann's voice cracked. "But we haven't given him enough time. He's showing improvement with Brewster." "This isn't a debate, Ms. Riggs." Callahan's eyes were cold. "The paperwork is already processed. Be here at 8 o'clock sharp to assist with the procedure." Throughout her shift, Luann watched Knox and Brewster together. The white mutt no longer cowered in the corner, but lay calmly beside his companion. When Brewster shifted position, Knox would adjust to maintain contact, as if drawing strength from the older dog's presence. They had formed a bond that defied the shelter's clinical assessments. As evening approached, Luann made her decision. She couldn't let Knox die, not when he was finally learning to trust again. And she couldn't separate him from Brewster, the only being who had managed to reach through his fears. She waited until the night shift changeover, when the shelter was minimally staffed. With trembling hands, she gathered supplies, leashes, some food, her emergency cash, and the backup key she wasn't supposed to have. Her old pickup truck was parked at the far end of the lot, away from security cameras. At 11:30 at night, Luann made her move. She silenced the kennel block's security system using the maintenance code she'd memorized months ago. The corridor was dark and quiet as she approached Knox and Brewster's enclosure. "Hey, boys," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Brewster's ears perked up immediately. Knox raised his head, alert but not aggressive, a change that still amazed her. With shaking fingers, Luann unlocked their kennel. Brewster seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, rising silently to his feet. Knox followed his lead, staying close to the German shepherd's side. Luann's heart pounded as she carefully clipped leashes to both dogs' collars. "We have to be very quiet," she murmured, leading them toward the shelter's rear exit. Every shadow made her jump. Every small noise seemed amplified. Knox remained surprisingly calm, taking cues from Brewster's steady presence. They were almost at the door when a sound made Luann freeze. Footsteps in the front office. The night guard was making his rounds early. With nowhere else to go, she quickly guided the dogs into a supply closet, pulling the door nearly shut. The beam of a flashlight swept past as the guard walked by. Luann held her breath, one hand buried in Brewster's fur, the other gently restraining Knox. Neither dog made a sound. After what felt like hours, the footsteps faded away. Luann counted to 60 before easing the closet door open. The corridor was clear. Moving as quickly as she dared, she led the dogs to the exit and out into the cool night air. Her truck waited in the shadows, the bed already lined with blankets. "Up you go," she whispered, helping first Knox, then Brewster into the truck's cab. They settled together on the passenger seat as if they'd done this 100 times. Luann slid behind the wheel, her hands shaking so badly she could barely insert the key. As she pulled out of the parking lot, Luann caught a glimpse of the shelter in her rearview mirror. The reality of what she'd just done hit her hard. She had committed a crime, thrown away her job, and become a fugitive. But when she looked at Knox and Brewster, saw how they leaned against each other, she knew she'd made the right choice. The night enveloped them as Luann drove away from the shelter, away from the system that had failed these dogs, away from everything she'd known. She had no real plan beyond putting distance between them and the morning's scheduled euthanasia. But she had hope, determination, and 2 dogs who deserved a chance at life. The headlights of Luann's pickup truck cut through the pre-dawn darkness as she navigated the winding mountain roads. Knox and Brewster remained quiet in the passenger seat, their fur brushing against each other with every turn. She'd driven through the night, following the hastily scribbled directions to Major Hank Donnelly's remote property. The gravel driveway seemed to stretch forever, bordered by towering pines and no trespassing signs. When she finally reached the clearing, a weathered cabin came into view. A stocky figure stood on the porch, arms crossed, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Luann parked and took a deep breath. "This is it, boys." Her voice trembled slightly. "I hope he'll help us." As she opened her door, Brewster's tail began to wag. He clearly recognized something familiar. The German Shepherd's excitement triggered Knox's anxiety, and the white mutt pressed himself against the seat, trembling. "You must be Luann," Major Donnelly called out, his voice gruff but not unkind. He descended the porch steps, moving with the measured pace of someone used to dealing with nervous dogs. "And that's definitely Brewster. Been a while, old friend." Brewster whined softly from inside the truck. Donnelly approached slowly, letting the German Shepherd catch his scent. The moment of recognition was powerful. Brewster's entire body relaxed, and his tail wagged with renewed vigor. "I'm sorry to show up like this," Luann said, wringing her hands. "But we didn't have anywhere else to go. Knox was scheduled for euthanasia, and I couldn't." Donnelly held up a hand. "Let's get them settled first. Talk later." He peered into the truck at Knox, who was trying to make himself as small as possible. "That's the one you mentioned on the phone?" Luann nodded. "He's come so far with Brewster, but he's still scared of new situations." "Can't blame him," Donnelly muttered. He stepped back, giving them space. "There's a fenced training yard around back. Let's start there." It took 20 minutes to coax Knox from the truck. Brewster stayed close, his calm presence the only thing keeping Knox from completely panicking. The white mutt's eyes darted everywhere, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Every sudden movement or sound made him flinch. The training yard was impressive. Professional-grade equipment, different types of terrain, and high-secure fencing. Donnelly watched as Knox explored cautiously, always staying within a few feet of Brewster. "You were right about their connection," he said quietly to Luann. "Never seen anything quite like it. Brewster's doing exactly what he was trained to do: protect and stabilize." They sat on weather-worn benches while the dogs investigated the yard. Donnelly's expression grew serious as he observed Knox's movement patterns and reactions. "That dog's been through hell," he stated flatly. "The way he favors his left side, how he freezes at certain angles, classic bait dog trauma. But he's not broken. See how he checks in with Brewster? That's new learning overriding old fear. It's a good sign." Luann felt hope flutter in her chest. "So you think he can be rehabilitated?" "With time and the right approach." Donnelly's face darkened. "And Brewster being here, that's no coincidence. Did you know his handler Jim was investigating an organized dogfighting ring before he died?" The revelation hit Luann hard. "No, the shelter just said he was surrendered after his owner passed. Jim's death was ruled an accident, but nothing about it sat right." Donnelly's voice was tight with old pain. He'd gotten close to something big, multiple fighting operations across 3 states. Then suddenly he's found at the bottom of a ravine during a routine patrol. Brewster had wandered closer, his ears pricked toward their conversation. Knox shadowed him, gradually growing bolder in the secure environment. "You can stay," Donnelly said after a long moment. "At least until we figure out next steps. I've got spare kennels, training equipment, and enough experience with traumatized dogs to help Knox. Plus ... He reached down to scratch Brewster's ears. "I owe it to an old friend to see this through." "Thank you," Luann whispered, tears of relief filling her eyes. "I know it's a risk." "Everything worth doing involves risk," Donnelly cut in. "Jim taught me that. Now let's get these boys settled, and you can tell me everything you know about where Knox came from. Might be time to finish what Jim started." As if understanding the weight of the moment, Brewster pressed against Donnelly's leg, while Knox watched from a careful distance, his posture already slightly more relaxed in the safety of the training yard. The morning sun crept over the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the ground, as 4 unlikely allies found themselves drawn together by fate and a shared purpose. The next morning began early, with dew still clinging to the grass in Donnelly's training yard. The major stood in the center, his posture military straight despite the early hour, while Luann watched from the sidelines. Knox huddled near the fence, his white fur almost golden in the sunrise, with Brewster positioned protectively between him and the others. "First rule of rehabilitation," Donnelly explained, his voice gentle but firm, "is establishing trust through routine. We start simple." He pulled a treat from his pocket, showing it clearly to Knox. "Food rewards, basic commands, no pressure." Over the next hour, they worked on the most fundamental command, sit. Knox watched warily as Brewster demonstrated, the German shepherd's movements fluid and confident. When it was Knox's turn, he trembled, but kept his eyes fixed on the treat. "That's it," Donnelly encouraged, keeping his voice low and steady. "Just like Brewster showed you." Slowly, hesitantly, Knox lowered his haunches. The moment he sat, Donnelly tossed him the treat, making sure it landed close enough to reach, but far enough to avoid startling him. "He's smart," Luann observed, noticing how Knox studied Brewster's every move. "He wants to learn." Donnelly nodded. "Fighting dogs aren't born mean. They're made that way. But Knox was different, a bait dog. They chose him because he wouldn't fight back. That takes a special kind of soul." Days turned into weeks. Every morning, they worked on basic obedience. Knox learned to sit, stay, and come when called. Brewster remained his constant shadow, demonstrating each command with patience and precision. When Knox grew overwhelmed, Brewster would position himself between the white dog and whatever triggered his fear, giving him time to recover. One afternoon, during a water break, Donnelly's expression grew serious. "There's something you need to know about what we're dealing with." He sat on a wooden bench, patting the space beside him for Luann. "The man behind the fighting ring, his name is Duke Brody." Luann noticed how Donnelly's hands tightened around his water bottle. "I take it he's not just some small-time criminal?" "He's a monster in expensive clothes," Donnelly growled. "Been running fighting operations across 3 states for 15 years. Law enforcement can't touch him. He's got too many people in his pocket. Brewster's ears perked up at the name, and he moved closer to the bench. Donnelly reached out to scratch behind the German Shepherd's ears. Jim, Brewster's handler. He was getting close to something big. Had evidence that would have brought down Brody's entire operation. Then suddenly, Donnelly's voice cracked slightly. They found his patrol car at the bottom of Miller's Ravine, ruled it an accident, but Jim knew those roads like the back of his hand. Knox had wandered over, drawn by the tension in their voices. To everyone's surprise, he pressed against Luann's legs, as if offering comfort. "Look at that," Donnelly said softly. "He's starting to show his true nature. Not aggressive, protective. That's what these sessions have been revealing. Knox has the instincts of a guardian, not a fighter." As if to demonstrate, Knox turned his head toward a sudden noise in the trees, positioning himself between the sound and Luann. His posture was alert but controlled, exactly like Brewster's. This is why they broke him, Luann realized, her heart aching. He wasn't just gentle. He was strong in a way they couldn't use. Exactly. Donnelly stood up, his expression determined. And now we've got both proof of Brody's operation and two key witnesses to his cruelty. Knox's scars tell a story, and Brewster... He looked at the German Shepherd meaningfully. Brewster never forgot what happened to his partner. The training session that afternoon showed just how far Knox had come. He executed each command with growing confidence, his movements becoming more precise. When Donnelly introduced the Protect command, Knox's transformation was remarkable. His fear melted away, replaced by a focused alertness that mirrored Brewster's professional demeanor. "Would you look at that?" Donnelly breathed, watching Knox stand guard over a practice scenario. "He's not just learning commands, he's finding his purpose." Luann wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the once-broken dog stand tall and proud beside his mentor. He just needed someone to believe in him. "Like all of us," Donnelly agreed. "But now we've got a bigger challenge ahead. Brody's still out there, still hurting dogs like Knox. And something tells me these two are going to be key to bringing him down, just like Jim always intended." Brewster and Knox stood side by side in the afternoon sun, their shadows stretching long across the training yard. One dog who never forgot his duty, and another who was just discovering his. Together, they represented both justice delayed and hope renewed, a combination that might finally be strong enough to face the evil that had shaped their paths. Luann spent her evenings in the local library, poring over newspaper archives and police reports. Her hands trembled as she pieced together a pattern of suspicious accidents and disappearances linked to Duke Brody's territory. Each article added another thread to the web of corruption, but she knew they needed more concrete evidence. "Look at this," she whispered to Donnelly one morning, spreading documents across his kitchen table. 3 police investigations shut down mysteriously. 2 witnesses who suddenly changed their stories. It's all here, but nothing ever sticks to him. Donnelly leaned over the papers, his face grim. "Brody's got eyes everywhere. We need to be careful." A harsh bark from outside cut through their conversation. Brewster, who had been dozing near the back door, suddenly jerked awake, his body tense. Knox started whining, pawing at the door frantically. Luann rushed outside to find Brewster stumbling, his legs giving out beneath him. Foam gathered at the corners of his mouth, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. "Major!" she screamed, dropping to her knees beside the German Shepherd. "Something's wrong." Donnelly burst through the door, took one look at Brewster, and sprang into action. "Get my truck started. There's rat poison in his system. I've seen this before." They lifted Brewster's heavy body together, Knox circling them anxiously. The drive to the emergency vet clinic felt endless, with Luann cradling Brewster's head in her lap, talking to him constantly. "Stay with me, boy," she pleaded, running her fingers through his faded fur. "We need you. Knox needs you." The veterinarian worked through the night. Donnelly paced the waiting room while Luann sat motionless, Knox pressed against her legs. When the doctor finally emerged, her scrub stained but her smile genuine, Luann burst into tears. "He's stable," the vet announced. "You got him here just in time. Another 30 minutes." She left the sentence unfinished. Back at Donnelly's property the next day, they found evidence of the attack. Pieces of tainted meat scattered near the fence line. Donnelly's face darkened as he collected the evidence in plastic bags. "This is Brody's signature," he growled. "A warning shot. He knows we're looking into him." Luann watched Knox sniffing the perimeter, his posture alert and protective. "Then we're getting close to something he doesn't want found." That evening, they gathered in Donnelly's living room, the curtains drawn tight. Brewster lay on his bed, still weak but recovering, while Knox kept vigil beside him. "We need to back off," Donnelly insisted, his voice heavy with concern. "Brody won't stop at poisoning dogs. Jim's death proves that." Luann stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "Number. That's exactly why we can't stop now. How many more dogs will die if we back down? How many more people will he hurt?" She pulled out her phone, showing them a text message from one of her shelter contacts. "There's a big fight scheduled for next month. Private location, invitation only. Your military connections, Major? Couldn't they help us get inside?" Donnelly rubbed his face, looking suddenly older. "I know some people who've been tracking Brody's operation. They might be able to get us in, but it's dangerous. One wrong move." "We'll need evidence," Luann pressed. "Clear footage of the fights, the betting, everything. Something so solid that even Brody's connections can't bury it." They spent hours planning, mapping out every detail. Donnelly would reach out to his contacts in law enforcement, while Luann would prepare to document everything with hidden cameras. Even the dogs seemed to sense the gravity of their mission. Brewster lifting his head to listen despite his weakness, Knox standing guard at the windows. "This is what Jim was trying to do," Donnelly said softly, looking at Brewster. "Finish what he started, boy. This time, we'll make it stick." As they finalized their plans, a rock crashed through the window, sending glass spraying across the floor. Knox immediately positioned himself in front of Luann, while Brewster struggled to his feet, swaying but determined. The note wrapped around the rock was simple: "Back off, or the dog was just the beginning." Luann's hands shook as she read it, but her voice was steady. "They're scared. We've got 1 month to get ready. 1 month to end this." Donnelly nodded grimly, already boarding up the broken window. 1 month to make sure Jim didn't die for nothing. Outside, the night pressed close against the house, full of unseen watchers. But inside, 2 dogs and 2 humans stood together, bound by purpose and protected by each other. The game had changed. They were no longer just seeking justice. Now, they were fighting for survival. The following weeks transformed Donnelly's remote property into a rigorous training ground. Every morning before dawn, Luann and Donnelly worked with both dogs, teaching them to remain calm amid chaos and stress. "Easy now," Donnelly commanded as he fired up a generator, creating sudden noise. Brewster remained steady, his eyes fixed ahead, while Knox flinched but held his position. "Good boys," again. They simulated the environment the dogs would face: shouting, crowds, the sounds of fighting. Luann's heart ached watching Knox struggle with his triggers, but Brewster's presence kept him grounded. The older dog seemed to sense when Knox was about to break, pressing against him or catching his eye at crucial moments. "The key is absolute silence," Donnelly explained, demonstrating hand signals. "No barking, no growling, no matter what they see or hear. One wrong sound could get us all killed." Luann practiced moving with the dogs through tight spaces, teaching them to stay close and quiet. She noticed how Knox, once so reactive, now looked to Brewster before responding to any situation. The transformation was remarkable, but the stakes were terrifyingly high. During breaks, Luann made careful phone calls from burner phones. "Sarah, it's me. I need your help with something big." Her journalist friend from college listened intently as Luann explained, careful to leave out specific details. "I'm sending you some preliminary footage," Luann continued, uploading videos of injured dogs being treated at various shelters. If anything happens to us, there's a sealed package that will be delivered to you. Promise me you'll run the story." Sarah's voice crackled with concern. "Luann, this sounds dangerous. Are you sure? Just promise me. These dogs deserve justice." The night of the fight arrived cold and moonless. Donnelly parked his truck behind an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. He wore worn jeans and a leather jacket, looking every bit the seasoned gambler he was pretending to be. "Remember," he whispered, checking his hidden camera, "no matter what happens, stay hidden with the dogs until I signal. If something goes wrong, get out fast and don't look back." Luann nodded, her heart pounding as she crouched in the truck's covered bed with Brewster and Knox. Both dogs were absolutely still, their training holding despite the growing sounds of cars and voices. Through small gaps in the cover, Luann watched men arriving in expensive cars, carrying briefcases and wearing smug expressions. Her stomach turned as she heard the distant sounds of dogs barking and crying. Donnelly disappeared into the crowd, his hidden camera recording everything. Luann activated her own body camera, documenting the steady stream of people entering the warehouse. Knox pressed against her leg, trembling slightly, while Brewster remained vigilant, his ears tracking every sound. After 30 minutes, Donnelly's signal came, 3 soft taps on the truck bed. Luann slipped out with the dogs, using the shadows to reach a side entrance. Inside, the scene was worse than she'd imagined. Cages lined the walls, stacked too high, containing dogs in various states of injury and terror. The main fighting pit was surrounded by cheering men, waving cash, while 2 bloodied dogs tore at each other in the center. Luann bit her lip until she tasted blood, forcing herself to keep filming. Knox's muscles were rigid under her hand, but he stayed quiet, following Brewster's lead as they moved between the cages. Luann's camera captured everything: the bedding sheets, the medical supplies used to patch up dogs for more fights, the faces of the men handling thousands of dollars in illegal bets. Donnelly worked the crowd masterfully, placing small bets and engaging in conversation, gathering names and connections. His camera caught handshakes, exchanges of money, and most importantly, Duke Brody himself, moving through the crowd like royalty. The night stretched endlessly. Luann's legs cramped from crouching, and her hands shook from suppressed rage. Both dogs remained miraculously controlled, though she could feel their shared tension. Brewster's eyes never left Knox, guiding him through their worst nightmare with unwavering focus. When Donnelly finally gave the signal to leave, Luann had filled 2 memory cards with footage. They slipped out during a particularly loud fight, the dogs moving like shadows beside her. In the truck, Luann finally allowed herself to breathe, pulling both dogs close as Donnelly drove them away from the horror. "We got it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We got everything." Donnelly nodded grimly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Now comes the dangerous part: getting it to the right people before Brody realizes what we've done. Brewster rested his head on Luann's lap while Knox pressed against her side, both dogs gradually relaxing as the warehouse disappeared behind them. They had succeeded in their infiltration, but Luann knew this was just the beginning. The real fight, bringing Duke Brody to justice, was still ahead. Chapter 7, Scene 2. Sarah worked fast. Within 24 hours of receiving the footage, she had contacted federal authorities and arranged a coordinated response. The evidence was damning: faces, names, transactions, all clearly documented. The raid was planned for Duke's next major event, scheduled for Saturday night. Luann paced nervously in Donnelly's truck, parked a safe distance from the warehouse. Both dogs watched her intently, picking up on her anxiety. Brewster's gray muzzle followed her movement, while Knox's ears twitched at every sound. "They're moving in," Donnelly whispered, watching through binoculars. Red and blue lights suddenly flooded the area as police vehicles swarmed the warehouse from all directions. Shouts and screams erupted from inside. "We should go," Donnelly urged, but Luann was already moving. She couldn't just wait. There were dogs inside that needed help. With Brewster and Knox at her heels, she sprinted toward a side entrance. The scene inside was chaos. Men scattered in all directions, money flying through the air. Caged dogs barked frantically as officers rushed to secure the area. Luann pressed against the wall, trying to stay out of the way while looking for anyone attempting to harm the animals. That's when she spotted Duke Brody slipping toward a back exit, carrying a metal briefcase. Without thinking, she followed, determined not to let him escape with evidence. Brewster and Knox stayed close, moving silently through the mayhem. Near the exit, Duke spun around, his face twisted with rage when he saw her. "You!" he snarled, reaching into his jacket. The metallic glint of a pistol caught the harsh fluorescent light. Luann's breath caught in her throat. "It's over, Duke. The police have everything." "Not quite everything," he sneered, raising the gun. But before he could aim, Brewster launched himself forward with a speed that belied his age. The German Shepherd's powerful body slammed into Duke's arm. The gun went off. Brewster yelped and crumpled to the ground, blood spreading across his faded tan and black coat. Luann screamed, her voice piercing through the chaos. Duke scrambled to his feet, but Knox was already moving. The white mutt's transformation from victim to protector happened in an instant. Gone was any trace of fear or hesitation. With a deep growl that seemed to come from his very soul, Knox launched himself at Duke. His aim was precise, just as Donnelly had trained him. Knox's jaws clamped around Duke's gun arm, bringing the man down with controlled force. Duke howled in pain, the weapon clattering across the concrete floor. "Get him off! Get him off!" Duke screamed, but Knox held firm, pinning him down without causing serious injury. A far cry from the savage fighting he'd been forced to endure in this very warehouse. Police officers flooded the area, weapons drawn. "Release!" Luann commanded, her voice shaking. Knox immediately let go and backed away, standing guard between Duke and his wounded friend. As officers handcuffed Duke, Luann dropped to her knees beside Brewster. The old dog's breathing was labored, but his eyes were alert, fixed on Knox with what looked like pride. "Stay with me, boy," Luann pleaded, pressing her hands against the wound in his shoulder. "Help's coming? Please stay with me." Knox settled beside them, his white fur still bristling, but his posture protective rather than aggressive. He gently nosed Brewster's muzzle, whining softly. The former fighting dog had become a guardian, proving to everyone what Luann had known all along, that inside his scarred body beat the heart of a hero. Emergency veterinary services rushed in, carefully loading Brewster onto a stretcher. Knox followed close behind, refusing to leave his friend's side. As they carried Brewster out, Luann caught a glimpse of Duke being led away in handcuffs, his face twisted with impotent rage. The warehouse that had seen so much cruelty now swarmed with police and animal rescue workers. Caged dogs were being carefully removed, each one a testament to the brutality they had helped expose. But amid the operation's success, Luann could focus only on Brewster's labored breathing and Knox's unwavering vigilance. They had done it, exposed the ring, caught Duke, and saved countless dogs. But the victory felt hollow as Luann watched blood seep through Brewster's fur. Knox standing guard like a transformed angel, no longer a victim, but a protector until the very end. The veterinary emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos as staff rushed Brewster through swinging doors. Knox tried to follow, but an assistant gently held him back. The white dog's eyes never left the doors where his friend had disappeared, his whole body trembling with concern. Luann sank into a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, her hands still stained with Brewster's blood. Major Donnelly paced the floor, his military bearing cracking under the strain. Every few minutes he'd stop to pat Knox, who had planted himself firmly by the emergency room doors. "He's tough, that old soldier," Donnelly said, his voice rough. "Been through worse scrapes than this?" Luann nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The clock on the wall ticked endlessly as minutes stretched into hours. Knox refused water and the treats offered by sympathetic staff members, maintaining his vigil. Around midnight, Luann's phone buzzed. It was Sarah, her journalist friend sending links to breaking news stories. The headline screamed across her screen, "Major dogfighting ring busted. Dozens of fighting dogs rescued. Criminal kingpin Duke Brody in custody." "Look at this," she whispered to Donnelly, showing him her phone. The articles detailed the extensive charges against Duke, multiple counts of animal cruelty, illegal gambling, and weapons charges. But the biggest revelation came from the police investigation. They had linked Duke to the suspicious death of Brewster's handler 3 years ago. "Manslaughter charges," Donnelly read aloud, his hands clenching into fists. "They found evidence in that briefcase he was carrying. Documents, photos, everything Officer Martinez had been collecting before he died." A soft whine from Knox drew their attention. The white dog had pressed his nose against the emergency room doors, his ears pricked forward at some sound only he could hear. Moments later, a tired-looking veterinarian emerged. "The surgery was complicated," she began, removing her surgical cap. "The bullet missed his heart but caused significant damage. He lost a lot of blood." Luann felt her own heart stop. Knox padded over and pressed against her legs, as if lending her strength. "But," the vet continued with a small smile, "he's stable. That old boy's got an incredible will to live. The next 24 hours will be critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic." Relief flooded through the waiting room. Knox's tail wagged for the first time since the shooting, as if he understood every word. The vet led them to recovery, where Brewster lay on a bed of blankets, connected to monitors and IV lines. "He'll need to stay here for several days," the vet explained. "We'll monitor him closely for any complications." Knox immediately settled beside Brewster's bed, resting his head near his friend's paw. The contrast between them was striking. The white mutt, once labeled as dangerous, now keeping careful watch over the decorated police dog who had saved him. Morning brought more news. Local television stations ran footage of Duke being led into the courthouse in handcuffs. New charges had been added: attempted murder for shooting at Luann. The evidence from his briefcase had blown the case wide open, revealing a network of corruption that had protected his operation for years. Reporters clamored for interviews about the dramatic takedown. They were especially interested in the unlikely pair of dogs who had helped bring Duke to justice: the retired police K9 and the reformed fighting dog. Photos of Brewster and Knox began circulating, their story capturing hearts across the country. But none of that mattered to Knox. He remained by Brewster's side, leaving only when forced to take bathroom breaks. The shelter staff who had once feared him came to visit, amazed by his transformation. The dog they had labeled as too dangerous to save now showed such gentle devotion that it brought tears to their eyes. "Look who's made the front page," Donnelly said softly, showing Luann the morning paper. There was a photo of Knox standing guard over Brewster at the warehouse, his white fur stark against the German Shepherd's dark coat. The headline read, "From Victim to Hero. Former Fighting Dog Helps Take Down Criminal Empire." Luann reached down to scratch Knox's ears. "You were always a hero," she whispered. "You just needed someone to believe in you." Knox looked up at her briefly before returning his attention to Brewster, who still hadn't woken. The monitors beeped steadily, marking each precious heartbeat. Outside the window, reporters gathered, hoping for updates on the hero dog's condition. But inside the recovery room, time seemed to stand still, measured only by Knox's patient breathing and Brewster's quiet struggle to heal. The old German Shepherd's life hung in the balance, but he wasn't fighting alone. Knox's unwavering presence seemed to anchor him to life, a testament to the extraordinary bond between two dogs who had found each other in the darkest of places. 3 days after the surgery, Brewster's eyes finally fluttered open. Knox's tail thumped against the floor as his friend's gaze focused on him. The white dog let out a soft whine of relief, and Luann, who had been dozing in a chair nearby, jerked awake at the sound. "Brewster!" she exclaimed, rushing to his side. The German Shepherd's tail gave a weak wag as she gently stroked his head. Knox pressed closer, careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment, and touched his nose to Brewster's. The veterinarian was amazed by Brewster's recovery. "His vitals are strong," she said during morning rounds. "The wound is healing beautifully. I've never seen anything quite like it." Having Knox here seems to have accelerated his healing process. News of Brewster's recovery spread quickly. Local television stations ran special segments about the heroic dogs who had helped bring down Duke Brody's criminal empire. Footage of Knox standing guard over his injured friend went viral on social media, touching hearts across the nation. A week later, Brewster was strong enough to go home. But where home would be had weighed heavily on Luann's mind until Major Donnelly pulled her aside with unexpected news. "The reward money from Duke's capture," he said, his eyes twinkling. "It's substantial. More than enough for a down payment on that little house you've been eyeing on Cedar Street." Luann's heart leaped. The cottage, with its big fenced yard, had seemed like an impossible dream on her shelter salary. Now, standing in the veterinary clinic's parking lot with adoption papers in her hand, that dream was becoming reality. The story of Knox's transformation from feared fighting dog to hero caught the attention of the Happy Tales Animal Rehabilitation Center, a prestigious facility specializing in treating traumatized animals. Their director reached out to Luann with a job offer she couldn't refuse, developing a program for rehabilitating dogs from fighting backgrounds. "Your insight with Knox proves that no animal is beyond hope," the director told her. "We need that perspective in our work." As Brewster recovered his strength, Knox's story began appearing in national campaigns about second chances. Shelters across the country used his journey from most dangerous to hero to challenge perceptions about unadoptable dogs. Photos of the gentle white dog who had once been considered too violent to save now appeared on billboards with the message, "Every dog deserves a second chance." The impact was immediate and profound. Shelters reported increased interest in adopting dogs with difficult backgrounds. Knox's story inspired people to look past labels and see the potential in every animal. 1 month after the shooting, Luann stood in her new backyard watching her 2 dogs explore their forever home. Brewster moved more slowly now, but his eyes were bright and alert as he surveyed his domain. Knox stayed close to his friend, matching his pace, occasionally glancing back at Luann as if making sure she was still there. "This is really happening," she whispered to herself, still amazed by how much their lives had changed. The cottage behind her was small but perfect, with a cozy front porch and plenty of room for 2 dog beds, though she suspected Knox would continue to sleep next to Brewster, as he had done since their first night at the shelter. Major Donnelly visited often, bringing treats and news about the ongoing case against Duke. The evidence found in the briefcase had led to dozens of arrests, dismantling the entire dogfighting network. More importantly, it had brought justice for Brewster's original handler, Officer Martinez. On warm evenings, Luann would sit on her porch, watching Knox and Brewster patrol their yard together. The sight of the white dog, once so feared and misunderstood, gently playing with neighborhood children who came to visit, never failed to move her. Brewster would supervise these interactions with obvious pride, his tail wagging whenever Knox demonstrated particularly good manners. Their daily walks became a familiar sight in the neighborhood. People would smile and wave, often stopping to greet the famous duo. Knox, who once cowered at human contact, now accepted gentle pets with dignity, while Brewster maintained his characteristic watchful presence. One beautiful spring afternoon, Luann took them to their favorite walking trail. Brewster moved with almost all of his old grace, his surgical scar barely visible beneath his fur. Knox trotted beside him, their steps perfectly synchronized. Watching them, Luann felt overwhelming gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought these 2 remarkable dogs into her life. They paused at a sunny spot overlooking the valley. Brewster settled into the grass with a contented sigh, and Knox immediately lay down beside him, their shoulders touching. Luann sat with them, her heart full as she observed their peaceful companionship. Here they were, the retired police dog who had never lost his instinct to protect, the fighting dog who had learned to trust, and the shelter worker who had risked everything to save them both. They had found more than safety. They had found family. As the afternoon sun warmed them, Brewster rested his head on his paws, and Knox did the same. Luann watched her 2 dogs, finally safe, finally home, and knew that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism come not in dramatic moments, but in the simple choice to believe in second chances. Thank you for watching. If even one moment stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another story that speaks to